Oh, hello, hello, hello. Welcome everybody that has decided to join the Buying into Brooklyn seminar workshop, whatever it is today. My name is Victoria Alexander. I'm the owner of Realty Collective, a small boutique real estate brokerage here in Brooklyn. This year, 2021, we will be celebrating our 16th anniversary, which sounds crazy to say out loud because I started this company when I was 25. We are, like I said, a small stereotype defining real estate brokerage. I try really hard to not act like the stereotypical real estate agent that you think of when you think of New York City real estate brokers. It's very challenging to always be put into those categories. I offer what for first-time homebuyers really is project management and coaching through the process. I know back in the day that most people relied on real estate brokers to find them property, and really the internet's changed all that. Today we're going to go through an overview of the process. You're going to have access to both me and Rashidah and Lisa to ask questions at the end of the class, but we're just going to do a quick overview of how the normal process goes and then open it up for questions. I've been doing this class for about 12 years. I used to do it in person. We were partnered with Brooklyn Based, which was a local blog. And I think that's it on my notes. I'm going to introduce and turn it over to Rashidah and Lisa. Rashidah is a lawyer that I've been working with for about 11 or 12 years because she was my lawyer when I bought my house. And Lisa is a mortgage loan officer that works at CrossCountry that I was partnered with through an associate of mine 2 years ago who specialized in first-time homebuyers, and she has just been excellent working with the clients that we've teamed up on together. So I'm gonna let Rashidah take it away.
Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. I think we're still allowed to say that until the end of January, correct? So hopefully everyone's doing well. And I'm going to apologize in advance if you hear a dog barking, because my dog has officially realized I give treats when to be quiet. And I think she decides to bark every time to get a treat. So I apologize for that in advance if you hear anything in the background. But yeah, my name is Rashidah Siddiqui. I have been practicing for over 18 years now, specializing in real estate law. I represent a lot of first-time buyers, also individuals that are selling. I'm licensed in New York and New Jersey, represent lots of clients, whether they're buying a house, co-op, condo, or selling either of those, as well as commercial properties. Small law firm located down in downtown Brooklyn, also working remotely during these times. So we'll give you kind of like what it's been like to do real estate during these interesting times, and the way we've decided to pivot and help clients out, especially first-time buyers. It's an overwhelming experience. I say it's kind of like a roller coaster. You've been looking, and then now you're on this quick ride that is going to close within 30 to 60 days, and you have your realtor, you have your loan officer, you have your attorney, and you have your team to guide you along that. So we're here to hopefully give you some information to make your process give you as much knowledge going forward.
And Lisa.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Lisa. I'm from CrossCountry Mortgage. I've been in the business for about 6 years. I also specialize in first-time home buyers. I really love working with first-time home buyers because there's a lot of questions involved, and it's really exciting helping someone buy their first home. I do co-ops, condos, multifamily, single family. Specialize in the New York City market, but I do deals in New Jersey, upstate New York, Westchester, including all over the country. CrossCountry Mortgage, we're a private mortgage lending bank, which means we work like all of the big banks, but all we do is mortgages. We can both broker deals or do deals in-house. Which I think is really cool because basically that gives me a whole bunch of products and I can choose the right one for you and for your specific purchase and what you're looking for. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how we can help you out.
Great, there we go. So welcome everybody. At the end of this, you'll also get an email from us with a home buying handbook that has a ton of resources. We're just gonna do a short, just for those that just joined us, a short overview of everything and save questions for the end. But the best place to leave questions is in the chat so that at the end of us speaking, we can just jump right into your questions. And all of us are available after this for a one-on-one call if you have questions that you don't wanna ask in front of everybody else. So first, slide is always why buy. Rashidah and Lisa and I were just talking about some of the deals. We have so many deals together right now, which is kind of crazy. And it's just an amazing time to be a buyer because interest rates are historically low. When we started this class online in April of last year, we were talking about how low they were, and it was all like low threes, 3.1, 3.25, and we just thought that was crazy. And Lisa's offering some clients right now 2.7, 2.8, maybe even less, Lisa, I'm not sure. Yes, it's crazy. And for the one client we're working with that he bought, you know, an apartment and a parking space, and his mortgage at the end of the day is going to be $2,100 with his maintenance and his taxes is going to be around $2,100 a month in Brooklyn. On the border of like Clinton Hill, Bed-Stuy, in a beautiful apartment building with a gym and rent. There's no reason that you should be spending money on rent when you have the possibility of buying something and paying less or equal to what you do in rent in New York City and build yourself equity. You get to pick your own design. It's a great long-term investment, short-term investment. And that you're really in control, that the rent's not going to be jacked up on you. And that you get to make it your own space. And then if you want to move to LA, I don't know why you'd want to do that, but if you wanted to and you bought a condo, you could rent it out. And then it would most likely, not only the rent, hopefully the rent's definitely going to bounce back. Rents are starting to bounce back a little bit, that you'd be able to rent it out and the income would pay not only the mortgage, but maybe you'd actually have some profit there in some of those situations. So those are the reasons that I encourage people to buy. Meredith, you want to go to the next slide? The rent versus buy matrix. This was something that people used a lot to figure out if it was smarter to stay in their rental or if it was smart to buy. And I would say it's hard now if you are in a rent stabilized apartment and if you could find some amazing deal that you could negotiate right now, but that rents are really low. And if you don't plan on staying in New York for the next 4 to 5 years, maybe it isn't the right time for you to buy. So we do have this rent to buy matrix. It's calculated by the New York Times, and it's a really good tool to figure out if this is something that you should be doing based on what your current rent is or your future rent would be. Next slide, Meredith. So the first thing I encourage people to do, when people reach out to me, the first thing I tell them to do is call Lisa and make sure they're qualified to get financing. And so I encourage people to assemble your team. And the team members you really need are a real estate broker, which is a buyer's broker. That would be me or somebody else. I really encourage people, just because you're taking this class, don't just pick me, interview other people, feel comfortable with the communication style and the personality type. You want to like the person that you're working with because you're going to be spending a lot of time with these people. And same thing, an attorney and a mortgage broker. So those are the 3 people you have to have. In New York City, you have to have those 3. You don't have to have a buyer's broker. Some people try to go it alone, but I would say you are, especially as a first-time home buyer, you are really at a disadvantage of not having a broker. And when I'm representing a property and somebody walks in without a broker, I'm usually discouraged from trying to close a deal with them because I know there's going to be a lot of challenges that I can't overcome working alone with them and representing the seller. I have a fiduciary responsibility to the seller, and that is who I represent and I'm trying to work hard for. So, and then other people you might need are an inspector, a contractor or architect. Do you guys want to talk about just what you do as team members?
Yeah, sure. So I'm normally the 3rd in line after you found your realtor, loan officer, you're supposed to get qualified, you have your realtor, and then you have your attorney. But it's always good to have a client that's kind of, already spoken to me in advance, so that once they get to that point where they need the attorney to come in, I can come in right away and start reviewing documents. So as your attorney, I also have a fiduciary obligation to you, attorney-client privilege. Even if I'm working with the realtor or working with the loan officer, my ultimate client is you as the buyer. I'm the buyer. That is for me to do the diligence. That is for me to review the contract to make sure that your interest is protected. And I had a person called me recently and went over kind of like what my services are as far as reviewing, doing the due diligence. And then cost is a factor as well. And she went into contract, she went with a family friend, and I'm sure enough, a couple of maybe 3 weeks later, I'm getting a call, can you step in because the person doesn't know what they're doing, they're not responding. And it's just important that you do, when you're looking for an attorney, that you are dealing with a real estate attorney. I can't even, I reiterated that before COVID, and I'm reiterating it even more now because so many nuances with working with wires, working with remote closings, working with escrow closings and things like that, that if you do not have a real estate attorney, your deal, especially if you're trying to close, can be very, very difficult. And that has, so always interview an attorney, find out how long they've been practicing, find out if they have support staff, find out if they, if you're working with them versus a paralegal, how many clients have they represented in buys or sales? Are they familiar with New York? So it's very important that you have an attorney that does real estate. That ultimately gets you to your closing as well.
And yeah, for me, so like Victoria mentioned, so I really, on the mortgage side, I'm probably one of the first people you talk to, because you really it's really important when you're starting to look at property that you know how much you can get pre-qualified for. Because the last thing you want to do is fall in love with the budget that's beyond the mortgage you can get. Similarly, you don't want to sell yourself short on, oh, I can only afford like a $400,000 apartment. And maybe in fact, you can, from the mortgage standpoint, afford more than that. And then it's your choice whether you want, that high of a loan. So it's really important when you construct your team that, you talk to your mortgage professionals. A lot of what Rashidah said, you want to make sure that they know the New York City market. It's really important. Like if you're looking at condos and particularly co-ops, you want a mortgage officer that understands condos and co-ops. And a really good trick is if they're telling you the closing cost for a co-op are $10,000, they don't really know what they're talking about. I had a deal that I was talking to a client and she's like, well, that's totally different than what this mortgage officer said. And I said, well, that's because he doesn't understand co-ops. He's pricing the closing costs as if it's a condo, and it's not. So it's really important that you sort of have a good feeling with the person who's your mortgage officer, that they have your back, that they're responsive, that they're giving you good advice and know what they're talking about. Because it's potentially going to be a long relationship. I mean, when I start working with someone as a pre-approval, sometimes, they find a place in a month, sometimes it's a year, and that's totally okay. The second thing I'll say is sometimes people are under the idea that just talking to me is like a fee. That's not the case. You can talk to me once, you can talk to me 100 times. I don't get paid based on, the quality and content of our customer service. I get paid based on the loan closing. So that's sort of, the second thing I would say is if you're self-employed, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, that's a question you need to have with your mortgage officer when you're setting up your team. You want to make sure that you're working with a bank and with someone that understands how to qualify you if you're self-employed, and gives you very good advice in terms of what you need to do, not just now, but in the next tax year, to make sure that you stay qualified for the purchase price you're looking at. And the final thing I'd say is Yelp reviews and, doing a little bit of research online is always a good thing. If there's one bad review, don't freak out. Everyone has one or two bad reviews, but really what you want to do is get a sense of the clientele that your loan officer or your lawyer or your realtor is serving and the kind of feedback they're getting from their clients, because that's going to give you a really good idea if it's the right person for you.
I think I have no bad reviews, just so you know. I think it's like 4.9 stuff. But I just want to reiterate and build on what some of the things that Lisa and Rashidah said. It's really important when you're building your team that your teams kind of know each other. So if you pit Lisa and she says, here, I really like this and this person, or these are 3 lawyers that I work with all the time and I have rapport with them, it's easier for me to call people that I've already worked with and hold them accountable and have good communication with them, because I've done deals before. And like the 3 of us, you know, I'm so happy that we started working together as a team like 2 years ago and doing this class together, because now we have so many deals and we're always checking in and on top of it. It has streamlined the process and has been immensely helpful for our clients that get to have the benefit of working with 3 people that, you know, work so well together. So what I was just going to say, when Rashidah was talking about hiring a family broker or somebody that doesn't know New York City real estate, it is so important that your lawyer does New York City real estate, that they are in New York, that they've dealt with co-ops and condos, and that they are not your parent or uncle or whatever. That has killed a handful of deals for me, because lawyers then try to negotiate the actual deal and feel like they're being protective of their family member and take on a different, sometimes they don't know how to wear the hat of just their family's lawyer because they have a personal relationship with them. And I think that has been really challenging from the deals that I've worked on. And I was going to say something, asking Lisa, because I think that I've had this question a couple times and people are confused. Like for me, I get paid by the seller. So there is no cost to the buyer to work with a real estate buyer's broker. And I think that people are confused about how mortgage brokers and loan officers get paid. So do you want to just take a second before we move forward and explain that so that so I think transparency and just being upfront about how that works would be really helpful for people.
100%. So like, you know, I get paid when a deal closes. So my whole team, we get paid when a deal closes. So it's in our financial interest, as well as helping you to, you know, get a deal closed and do right by you to make that happen. How I get paid is based on the loan amount. It's not based on the product. A client brought that up to me once, asking me, and it was a really good question. I don't get paid differently if you choose a 30-year or a 15-year or an ARM or, you know, anything like that. I get paid based on the loan amount. So the other thing that you should always know that's like really, really important is it's called points. So points can be used to buy down the rate, or they can be used for origination, which basically means the bank is getting paid a little bit more by using a point. When you're talking to loan officers about rate, you always want to specify if there's points or not. Like I never quote a rate with points ever. I always am doing, you know, if I'm telling you what a rate's going to be, it's without points. When it's time to lock, if you choose that you want to pay points to buy down the rate, that's great. But it's sort of unfortunate in my industry that I think sometimes loan banks actually don't really disclose the points properly because it can make it very confusing. If you ever have a question, you should ask for a closing cost worksheet, because that closing cost worksheet will always show if there's origination points in there. And I'm happy to review either mine or, you know, someone else's if you have got a closing cost worksheet that you're confused about. But yeah, that's how we get paid. So it's based on the loan and it's based on us closing, and those are really the 2 factors.
So is it a percentage of the loan?
Yep, it's a percentage of the loan. It's a percentage of the loan.
And so compared to working with a bank, like, is there a benefit to working, like, what's the difference for just what the cost would be to somebody? I definitely deter people from working with firms or banks that have had problems with like appraisals and or them understanding co-ops. Bank of America has been frustrating this year. They've never been frustrating, but this year I've had a couple deals that,
Sure.
like Rashidah and I are doing a deal with Bank of America right now, and I want to strangle the woman that that is handling my client's deal. And she talked to Lisa, and the situation just worked out because it was attached to her financial advisor.
Sure.
But Wells Fargo has given me horrible appraisal situations in the past.
Right.
I always encourage people, because there's a multitude of products that mortgage brokers have access to. And because, maybe you need to get your parent to co-sign, or all these different things that I would say traditional banks and freelancers deter from. So I'm interested to see like what the real difference is, so people understand, that part of it.
Sure. So, and actually I should specify. So the percentage I get paid by the loan, I get paid by the bank. I don't get paid by you.
Right.
So the only fee that a client pays to our mortgage company is it's an $11.95 application commitment fee. And that covers the whole kit and caboodle from beginning to end. And that just covers all of the people that are working on your loan, the team, like everything. But in terms of, so in terms of appraisals and banks versus brokers. So again, so I am a bank, I'm not a broker. But I can function as a broker when I need to. And again, what I really like about that is it gives me all of these products versus like, if you talk to Bank of America, they're going to have one 30-year product. It's their Bank of America 30-year product. I have a bunch of them. So that sort of helps me figure out the best product for you. In terms of appraisals, and I guess this actually sort of continues to go with the team. So when you're going through the mortgage process, there always can be a hiccup. And I think the difference between good and bad mortgage officers, just like good and bad attorneys and good and bad realtors, is how you deal with those hiccups. An appraisal is one of them. Appraisers are conservative by definition because they're looking at the value of the property for the bank, not the value of the property that it's being sold at per se. That said, typically on purchases, where I'm finding appraisals come in low is actually upstate because there's such a demand right now. What's really great about my team is one of my branch managers used to be an appraiser, which is really helpful. So if I get an appraisal that's low, the very first thing I do is call him. And as a former appraiser, he can sort of look at it and give me an idea of like, well, the appraiser was a little lazy. This is how it might come back. This is how you can sort of contest it and try to get a higher value. Or, this appraisal is pretty solid. And if that happens, then again, how you deal with those hiccups, there's a bunch of solutions if an appraisal comes in low. You can get mortgage insurance. You can work with Rashidah or your attorney to negotiate a lower price. You can get a seller's credit. There's a whole bunch of options. And in the last 2 years, I've had a handful of appraisals come in low, and only one of them killed the deal. And it was honestly the buyer's choice. They just decided, you know what, I don't think I want this property, which is fine. But it wasn't like there weren't solutions available if they had decided they wanted to move forward. So again, as you're assembling your team, that's like a really good question to ask as part of your interview process. Like, hey, what are some options if my appraisal comes in low? What are some options if I don't have the 20% down, et cetera, et cetera?
Great. So now you understand, everybody should understand what everybody's role is a little bit. I think that Rashidah will talk more about her job doing all the due diligence as we go down. But Meredith, can you go to the next slide? So we talked about financing a little bit, but maybe Lisa, you want to continue just talking about how much for down payment and credit scores, FHAs, and any COVID things.
Sure, I'll just talk really briefly. So in terms of how much you want to put down, the standard is 20%. You can put down, if you do something like FHA, you can put down as low as 3.5%. FHA, if you're going to go that route, really has to be a single or multifamily. It's very difficult to find condos that can work for an FHA. If you put less than 20% down, then you have mortgage insurance. And that's basically an insurance you pay on top of your hazard insurance until you are at roughly 78% equity in the property. In terms of, I do have a few no MI products, no mortgage insurance products. So with 10% down, it's based on the purchase price. So again, that's something you can talk to, your professional about if that's something you're interested in, if you're looking at putting less than 20%. Credit scores are a really important part in getting qualified. It's how we determine rate, and also how we, looking at your credit report, is how we determine that you can be qualified for the loan. In terms of COVID-19, at this point, really the only huge effect is if you're self-employed. That doesn't mean you can't get a loan if you're self-employed, but it does mean that in these times you're going to need more documentation, and you're going to, we're going to have to dig into your tax returns a little bit. If you're self-employed, the rule is you're only going to get qualified on money you pay taxes on. So if you deduct a lot from your income, if you're self-employed, to lower your tax bracket, that's going to affect how much you can get qualified for. The last thing I want to say is, I mentioned with sometimes, you have a long conversation with a mortgage professional before you finally find the right property. You should stay in contact with them. So I had a recent person who I pre-approved like 4 months ago, and she emailed me and she was like, hey, I just put an offer in on a place. By the way, I just left my job. I'm like, what? Like, you got to talk to me before you do that. Not because I'm going to tell you not to leave your job, but it's going to affect the pre-approval I gave you. So that's like why you really want to like the people you're working with, because these kinds of things, like, you need to keep your team, in the loop with what the decisions you're making, because it could affect what you're looking to buy.
That was a client from my office.
Yeah. I didn't want to, that was a little bit of
We put in the offer, and Tina's like, I'm not going to tell her the bad news. I'm going to make her call Lisa. And it's my job to talk about that, but maybe you should consider not leaving your job in the middle.
Right, exactly.
Okay, we're going to go to the next slide, Meredith. Thanks, Lisa. Where do you search? So I know that searching right now is really frustrating because there's so many different platforms. I have access to the back-end MLS, but the MLS is fighting with Rebney, so they've actually are not communicating. So for all of us, because of COVID, they have been really frustrating. So you have StreetEasy and Zillow and Trulia and Realtor.com. And besides StreetEasy, I would say it is really easy for all these other sites to have old and dead listings on them. And there isn't really one place that I recommend that you look for everything, because they're just not, collating all of those sites into one place. I can look on the back end and I have access and research to stuff, but it's just not an easy process right now. So look wherever you want. Just don't get your hopes up on anything, especially if it's been on the market a while. You should expect it. It's probably sold. So, but having your alerts on and I would say my favorite is StreetEasy still. It's very user friendly, and having a search criteria set up where you're getting the alerts right away for your criteria is really helpful. And it just depends on where you're looking to. Some sites are better in different neighborhoods. So if anybody's looking outside of Brooklyn in, the other boroughs or upstate, like upstate, I was using Zillow, but my broker up there has access to a different MLS, and he told me to use a different site. So just depending on what area you're looking for, we'll figure out what the best site is to maybe be doing some searching. And I'm happy to help in any way I can to make the search easy. And even though there isn't an automatic update, I can have my assistant look every other day, and do a new search for the updates. So next slide, Meredith. So the things that are probably part of your main criteria is figuring out your location. Somebody writes to me and says they can live in 10 different neighborhoods. I usually say the first part of your search after you've gotten your financing worked out is figuring out what neighborhood that you actually can afford to live in and that you want to live in. Because if you have 10 neighborhoods in Brooklyn, I would say that's like a really wide net, and because they're all so different, and understanding the typology of the apartments available there as well. So the type, the amenities, and I'm not sure what site is. I guess I have to update my notes. But so thinking about like if you wanted to live in Brooklyn Heights and you wanted to buy a condo there, condos are more expensive than co-ops. And there are a lot more co-ops in Brooklyn Heights than there are condos because it is an older neighborhood that is full of pre-war buildings. If you wanted to live in Williamsburg in a pre-war building, that would be a really difficult challenge as well because Williamsburg is mostly comprised of new construction condos. So making sure the typology of the building and the neighborhood coincide with your needs, and then the type of the product. So if you really want to be in a co-op, you're probably not going to look in Williamsburg either. You're probably also not going to look in Bushwick. You'd probably do Brooklyn Heights, depending, maybe Park Slope, Prospect Heights. And then the size then will play into it because Park Slope, you're not going to find a lot of co-ops in brownstones, and it's mostly a brownstone neighborhood. Okay, next slide, Meredith. So making an offer and negotiating the terms. Some basic terms are usually negotiated ahead of time before the deal sheets go to the lawyers. So you want to make an offer that is probably contingent on financing. So unless you're paying for the apartment all cash or the house all cash, you need to get a loan from a bank. So that means you're putting down 10 or 20% and that the rest is contingent on financing from a bank. You probably want the property contingent on an inspection. Not so much if it's a co-op, but if it's a condo or a building, you should ask to always get an inspection, especially as a first-time home buyer. You want to understand what you're buying, understand how the mechanicals work. And a lot of the times, if you have a good inspector, I have one that I really am great, that I really like, and they explain how everything works and then also tell you about maintenance and how to take care of the things that you're buying so that you get the longest life out of them. Because being a homeowner can be expensive. Making an offer. So Lisa and Rashidah and I were just talking about back in April and May how the market was tanking and there wasn't that many buyers in there, even though the interest rates were so good because there just wasn't faith in everything that was going on and so much uncertainty. But a lot of the buyers that I'm working with right now are competing in bidding wars. Things are going for over asking. And I think that everybody, including myself, have realized that this window of opportunity is closing and they're trying to move as fast as they can. So take advantage of the lull in the market, the lack of inventory, and the low interest rates. And I think sellers are recognizing that there's this change, and that's why prices are starting to come back up. In Brooklyn, the prices pretty much held. There was a little bit of a dip, but it wasn't too crazy. And there were some good deals. I feel like I missed some opportunities because I didn't convince my husband to move fast enough on buying an investment property. And we decided to invest. I was really hoping to buy a house upstate, and then the market's so crazy up there, ditched that idea. I was going to buy an investment in Brooklyn. And once I got him on board, because he doesn't always listen to me, I had to have my associate, Tina, that works with me, be our real estate agent because he will listen to her and not me. So she took him to come see a couple of things. And by the time that he came around, the properties that we thought were good investments had moved. And we missed that window. And I really think, the end of November, December was when I really was looking with intention. And January has been, there's no deals. I think that I kind of missed the boat on, at least for an investment property, not as if I was looking for another home, because I think the value's there long-term. I just don't see a lot of things where I could buy it and the rent would cover the mortgage evenly right now. I'd have to take a loss for a little bit. And I think that as somebody that's not living in the space, that would be challenging. So making an offer, you're going to make the offer. You're going to try to be as competitive as possible and make a cover letter. You're going to put your pre-approval letter in and a submit offer form outlining all your finances. And you want to disclose every single dollar that you have, your 401k, your savings, to show that a board or a bank is going to say yes to you. And there's not a risk in going with you as a buyer. Getting your offer in first. Don't wait 3 or 4 days after you've seen the property. As soon as you know you want to make an offer, let's wrap it up and get it in, because that always really bodes well with sellers. Oh, they were the first ones. That means something to them, surprisingly enough. And writing really compelling cover letter, I think also really works. So those are some suggestions for getting your offer in and some of the terms that you want to negotiate ahead of time. Rashidah, am I missing anything on negotiated terms before deal sheets go out and or after deal sheets go out?
Well, I mean, if you're looking at new construction, a lot of the terms like, so there's things that can be negotiated such as transfer taxes, sponsor attorney fee, credits that they can give you as incentive. I think that's where we're seeing more of kind of like the usual terms. Have a lot of people that are buying new construction are able to get a lot more concessions and credits and things in regard to that. That's what I've been seeing. In terms of if you're looking at a house, really it's going to be more about making sure you have that more, they know you're getting a mortgage, the amount of a mortgage that you're getting, and then also you do your inspection prior to you signing the contract. So you want to make sure you're getting your inspection right in immediately. Closing dates as well, if you have that, but really your attorney will kind of go over what your typical closing date and timeframes are in regard to the contract once we get the deal sheets. But I would say most of the kind of the terms that the standard would be financing contingency. And of course, if you're getting having your inspection prior to you signing the contract. But for new construction, I see more of the sponsor paying the transfer taxes and things like that.
It's crazy because there's so many different types of deals, and I forgot, even though I'm doing so many new construction deals right now. The other thing, if you're doing new construction, is you don't really need, I encourage people to get an inspection if the product is done. But if you're looking at something that's not finished yet and you're buying it off spec, you have to wait till the product is done if you want to do the inspection. But also you have, you do a punch list for before the closing to go in and say everything that needs to get fixed before you purchase the property. So paint, touch up here, there, make sure all the appliances work. There's a scratch here. You know, usually they'll do anything you ask because it's supposed to be a really polished, finished product when you're buying new construction. But you also get a warranty with new construction, and that's in your contract as well. So you do have less risk. You're buying as is when you're buying a co-op or condo that's a resale, but with new construction, right, Rashidah, how long is the guarantee?
Depends on the building. So if it's a building that's under 6 stories, there's what we call as a housing merchant implied warranty that comes automatic with it. But if it's above 6 stories, then that's really up to the sponsor. Some buildings, new construction, no, there's no warranty, but the punch list items do survive closing and they have to complete it with a certain amount. Some sponsors will give you a limited warranty, maybe a year, but it really depends on the size of the building. Under 6 stories, you have an automatic, as I said, the housing merchant implied liability that's governed by law. Anything above that is really on the discretion of the sponsor or that building. And a lot of times, as I said, they would give you something, but it's about how long it is, maybe just 1 year. But at minimum, the inspection items, once you put it on that survives the closing.
Great. So next slide, Meredith. So we've submitted your offer, we've negotiated your terms are accepted. We then send out deal sheet. I send out deal sheets to the lawyers or the seller's broker does with the terms of the deal. And the seller's lawyer will send to the buyer's lawyer a contract usually. And the buyer will have the inspection if they're buying a property that needs an inspection before you sign the contract. And the seller's lawyer is also sending to your lawyer all the due diligence materials. So Rashidah, you want to go over for the different products what the due diligence usually it looks like?
Yeah, so basically once we get the deal sheet as your attorney, I like to see it because I want to see what the preliminary negotiated terms are. So when I get the contract from the seller's attorney, I can make sure they had a mortgage contingency in there. They had, if they had a closing date, it's going to be, if that's a big issue, maybe the seller isn't ready to close and they need 90 days to close versus the standard, which is 60 days. So I need to let my client know that's in there. If there's exclusions such as furniture, a chandelier or something that's in there. So we want to see that deal sheet. So when I get the contract, I can make sure those terms are in there. At minimum, when I'm looking at a contract for a house, I'm making sure that if there's a mortgage contingency in there, and then regarding the as-is condition that you've done your inspection prior to you signing, because that means you understand the condition, it's as is. Certain items have to be in working order, but if they weren't working when you saw the property, they don't have to be in working order when you close. So we want to make sure you do that inspection. It's extremely, extremely important for a house. If you're looking at a condo or a co-op, we have to do due diligence. That typically, I say, takes about a week. It depends on the building, on the management company, because we have to get the offering plan, the financials, the board meeting minutes, speak with the management company to get questions answered. Because what we're looking for is to make sure that even though you love the property, seeing it, that you're buying into a financially sound building. And that's really for an existing co-op or an existing condo. If it's a new construction, then we have another form of due diligence that I do in regard to reviewing the offering plan and the amendments, seeing time-wise where they are regarding closings, getting a certificate of occupancy, how many units are in contract. I like to do a full, complete due diligence. Some attorneys don't do as much due diligence as I do, but I like it because my thought is that the more information you have up front, then the least you have the issues when you go into contract and you know, hey, this is new construction. They're saying they're closing in 2 months, but you're one of the first or 2 contracts. Realistically, that's not going to happen. So I need to let you guys, know that because you want to have a realistic time frame. And if you're buying a co-op or a condo that's existing, you want to know what their alteration policy is. You want to know what their subletting policy is. You want to know their owner occupancy because your bank may have an issue with that once you get into contract. So the more information that you have during that due diligence when I'm reviewing it is what we do before you even sign the contract. Contract of sale minimum, as I said, is a mortgage contingency, which includes an appraisal language in there. And that's extremely important because when you get your commitment, if that appraisal wasn't done, then I'm going to say, hey, this doesn't meet the contingency. Let's extend your time period to get your mortgage. Typically, you have 30 to 45 days to get your mortgage commitment. After that, the next step is title clearance and then closing. So we want to always make sure that you have, those time periods and you're aware of that. And if we need to extend time periods or things like that, then that has to go into the contract of sale. So that's getting into contract. And even before you even sign the contract, going over your estimated closing costs, so you know what you're going to need as well. And that's typically my meeting with our clients after I've done my due diligence is a Zoom meeting for maybe about 30 to 45 minutes to an hour, going over everything and answering questions.
So I'm going to quickly wrap it because we have so many questions and we've actually talked a lot on this call. I just like spending so much time with you guys and it's been really interesting because there's so much different things just happening in the market. So it's always nice to share.
Can I just say one thing real quick about the closing the deal? I was thinking when Rashidah talked, it's a really good example of why your lawyer and your mortgage officer really need to be in communication, like going back to the team. Like all of Rashidah's due diligence is actually really important to your mortgage too. When she's doing your due diligence before you go into contract as to a co-op or condo, if there are things that come up that might affect your mortgage as well. So it's really important. Like when I get a contract from Rashidah, the very first thing I say is, hey, is there anything I need to know about it? Like besides the standard stuff. And because that is all that stuff is really important to know up front. So there are no delays with underwriting or closing.
Meredith, do you want to so for the closing, then, we do a final walkthrough and then you sign a gazillion papers and COVID's changed a lot of that. We can talk about, it's not a huge, I think the getting started is the thing that a lot of people need to focus on. So I'm going to try to go back through some of the questions. There was, is 10% down a risky move?
On a mortgage side, no, but I think Victoria, you can talk more about the offer side. On a mortgage side, doing a 10% down is a totally fine product. We can talk about the options. I think, Victoria, it's more to you about if you'll get the property.
So it makes you less competitive unless you're buying a property that isn't in demand because sellers are concerned that you might not get your financing or not pass a board. So I would say that the risk is really about you being a competitive buyer to sellers and being able to compete in this market. But if you don't, I always say, like, I worked with people for the longest I've ever worked with somebody is 5 years, and just took them that long to get their financing together, to figure out what they wanted. They had to ended up working with a financial consultant, like all these things to make it work. So I think that it's just important that you feel comfortable and that you have enough, God forbid there's another situation where you don't have income, that you're going to be able to cover your expenses and not put yourself in a more, risk averse situation. So, or riskier situation. Do you know of any incentives for first time home buyers? We heard Joe Biden was planning to give $15,000 tax credit, for example. So I would say in New York City, there aren't a lot of incentives for New York. There are incentives through your job that you should look into, that sometimes they'll pay your lawyer fee, or they'll, like, depending, like if you work at a bigger company, they do offer certain things like that. But grants and first-time home buyer credit, besides like the FHA program, which is it's hard to get an FHA loan in a co-op or you can't do it in a co-op. And really a lot of condos here in New York City don't take FHA. You're putting down like 3 or 5% because of the condo isn't approved by Fannie Mae, I think, right, Lisa? So that's why it's been challenging to get to participate in any of the first-time home buyers programs here in New York. And because the real estate market and the stock market has done so well during the pandemic, I think any of the incentives that they are working on are not going to be focused on home buying.
So just to interrupt, and I know Lisa's here, but as an attorney, I come through, different. So there are products, other banks and things that are giving incentives for first-time buyers that can pay towards your closing costs, give you a credit. I would just say that if you're looking at those banks, just ask them about their timeframes on closing and how much they're giving, because there are some banks that are giving, also depending on the neighborhood. They have some incentives. If you are buying in certain neighborhoods, the banks will give a credit towards your closing costs.
But
I'll also just add to that as well. That's actually a great point. But also you have to take into account like what the rate is. So just to give you an example, I have a client who called today and she was asking me about rate and various things. And she's like, well, this bank has a first-time home buyers program and they're giving a $7,000 credit. And I said, well, what rate are they offering? And she's like, well, 3.25. I'm like, I can give you a $7,000 credit with 3.25, or I can do 2.75 with no credit. And that's entirely up to you. So I think, if you want to look into some first-time home buyers programs, and I used to have them and we just don't really have them right now because the rate is so competitive with just conventional. But I would say that if you're going to look into that, like, make sure you're comparing apples to apples in terms of, if it works for what you need.
I agree. Sorry, somebody's writing me about an emergency rental situation. I'm still on the clock. I would say that that's really true, is just to look at the rates and other things that they're offering and make sure that they are then also familiar with New York City co-ops and condo scenarios that they are going to be able to actually get you to close. Because I have not, in the 16 years that I have worked with this, the only incentives that my clients have taken advantage of are FHA loans, where they're putting down like 5% on a house or doing something called a, where they also get the loan to do the construction, the 203K loan, sorry. And or gotten their job to pay for a lawyer or pay for certain credits. So any of the other programs that people have mentioned to me, I've actually never closed a deal with them. So I'm always skeptical that they make you a competitive buyer here in New York City, because the rules just it's New York City. The rules don't apply to us. The other questions, there's so many questions. Is it a buyer or seller market right now? So interesting. I think it's both. I have a client that we were formulating an offer today for, and when we were calculating, she wanted to originally put an offer in it. The property's listed at 630. She wanted to put an offer in for 550 because it's been on the market for a while. I called the other broker. We had a conversation. He's already had an offer at 600 that the seller did not take. And we started crunching numbers. And Lisa, I think she called you and got a new pre-approval. And The difference between her buying something at $550 and her buying something at $630 was $350 a month to her mortgage. So I think at the end of the day, when you're it also affected how much money she was putting down. So like, take that into account. But really, you're in a buyer's market because interest rates are so incredibly low that your purchasing power is so strong right now. And it's a seller's market because there's a lack of inventory for certain, especially in certain neighborhoods, and that people are wanting to take advantage of this moment. So both it's advantageous to be either right now in this market. And that's from my perspective anyway. How can we assess if an apartment is going to go up in value? The apartment is going to go up in value if it remains in New York City and you don't let it deteriorate. In New York City, you can sit on a property and it will automatically appreciate with you really doing nothing besides basic upkeep. You don't need to renovate the kitchen or bath for your property to go up in value in New York City. Just by it being in New York alone, it will appreciate. I bought my house 10 years ago. It has doubled in value. There is no reason not to be investing. There is like a metric to it of what the percentage, but I would not worry about property not going up unless you're buying in something that is undesirable now and will probably be undesirable in 10 years. Do you really need to have a cash reserve for 1 or 2 years of maintenance fees plus mortgage payment to buy? In a co-op, yes. It is, the co-op is going to demand that you have a certain amount in your reserves, and it changes from every co-op. Sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 2 years, sometimes it's 6 months, but they do not want to see you emptying your coffers to buy this apartment, because then they're worried that you're not going to be able to fulfill your obligation to pay your maintenance. Man, a lot of questions. There's some neighborhood specific ones. I want to look at something that questions for you guys can see these questions too. Is it better to buy new construction or existing co-op or condo? Does anybody have, I feel like I'm answering all the questions. Does anybody have any perspective on if it's what's better to buy, honestly?
I mean, I guess it really depends on what the person really is looking for. New construction, obviously, some of the newer ones have more amenities than a property that that's not new construction. Obviously, you want the neighborhoods, it's really going to be probably more amenities with the new construction ones, and then also with the time frames. If you're looking to close right away, then maybe a property that's already there, been built, they can, you don't have to wait for it to be waiting for a certificate of occupancy, construction going on. So it really depends on what you're actually looking for. I have clients that are, always, they're looking at new construction, but then ends up buying existing because they need to move in right away. And depending on the building, they may have bigger rooms rather than in new construction. So it really depends, I would say, on the individual.
I also think it's really important if you do new construction that you have a really good attorney, because I think that the sponsor is giving this offering plan, and you really need to have an attorney to sort of go through it. Rashidah's fantastic at new construction, and I highly recommend her. I do think from a first-time buyer standpoint, you really want to make sure, because on new construction, there's like a lot of paperwork, and it's some of it can seem sort of remote because maybe the apartment isn't done yet. So you really sort of need really good attorney to sort of walk you through everything and also help you understand like what's standard and what's not, so that you sort of understand what you're agreeing to. But I agree. I think it really depends on what you want.
I just thought about new construction is that, you're basically buying it at the ground floor. So I always tell clients, if you're buying new construction, you're probably going to have an increase in your common charges, because now everyone gets settled in when they close, and you start seeing what the actual building is needs versus a property that's already been built. They've been, operating for a couple of years. Your maintenance your common charges is probably kind of at a particular rate, and you can have more of a history there.
I also think taxes and the tax abatement is something to always consider too, because if a tax abatement is going to expire, and or if the taxes are really low right now, like the person that I am selling to, and they are going to have, a $2,100 mortgage payment, their taxes they have an abatement and it's going to expire at some point, and their monthlies are going to slowly go up. But I think they'll be manageable. Lisa already wrote to Petro for the FHA 203K loan, which is the loan that you would get that also has construction. And then the other question is, what about combining grants towards the down payment? I'm not sure what grants you're talking about. So maybe Lisa, does you know anything about combining grants for a down payment?
I've seen with other lenders, there's called a DPAL grant, which is a down payment assistance loan.
Yeah, we do
You have
those
to
too.
agree to live in the property for, let's say, 10 years as your primary, and they'll give you that grant to go towards your closing costs or towards the purchase, as long as you agree to live there for 10 years. Once you don't, then and if you move out prior, then you have to pay back depending on how long you live there. So it's called a DPAL grant, and people have used that. I have a client that just closed with recently with that, and it was a great incentive. And they knew that they were going to live there for at least minimum 5 years. Even if, let's say, they don't live there for 10 years, the amount to pay back would be such a small amount if they decided to move out earlier than 10 years.
10 years is a long commitment. I mean, to me, like, I've lived in this house 10 years, but if you had asked me on the day I was buying, I was going to live here for 10 years, I don't know if I would have like made that commitment to be here for that long.
And also, like with the DPAL, and we have programs with that too, primarily for New York City specific, but you have to, it's a little tricky because you also have to make sure you meet the income requirements, and most importantly, the purchase price meets the purchase price requirements. A lot of times when people call me and they're like, hey, I want to do like a down payment assistance program, typically either they make too much money or they want to buy something that's too expensive. So it is a really good program, but it's very sort of, it's very specific as to when it can be applied.
New York City, even through all of this, has stayed an expensive place to buy real estate. The prices just have not gone down like they have in other places. But even during this pandemic, I know that prices have gone up in so many different other areas around the country because of the people having other quality of life wants for their property and their lifestyle. So they, it's just driven people in other ways that real estate has gotten crazy in a lot of neighborhoods. One of the other questions was, is there a minimum percentage for equity needed to sell after you've purchased a property? No, there's something called the break-even horizon, where you want to make sure that you're getting your down payment plus all your closing costs back, so that you're not losing money on the transaction, because it's not just your down payment, it's the equity you've built into it plus your other expenses. And the rule of thumb is that you should probably hold the property for 5 years. And if you haven't, then you really need to get an Excel sheet out and work with your mortgage broker or real estate broker and calculate what your investment into the property is to make sure you're taking out the same amount, or what you're walking away with the same amount. Is it common in Brooklyn that you cannot sublet co-op apartments? Yes, it is common. And that's why they are less desirable and more challenging properties to purchase. And that's why they're cheaper also, because there's restrictions and you can't buy them as an investment.
That's also part of the due diligence that I do, is to find out what their subletting policy is. Because some may have, you have to live there for 2 years before you're allowed to sublet. If they have 100% owner occupancy and it's an existing building, then we know that, hey, they're really not going to allow you to sublet even if you've lived there for like 5 or 10 years.
Sure.
So part of that due diligence is finding out the sublet policy. But really, yeah, co-ops really are very strict with the subletting.
Just rolling back through the questions. Is there any new questions that we haven't answered that were on here? I'm just looking for something. There's a lot of interest in Fort Greene, Ditmas Park, upstate Dutchess County, it says. Okay, here's a list of questions. What are the biggest mistakes first-time home buyers make? And is there a particular neighborhood that are up and coming, can predict what would be in New Greenpoint or New York City over? Any first-time home buyer mistakes? I have a whole article about this on our blog, so I would love to hear from your guys' perspective from the lawyer or the mortgage for the loan officer, what the mistakes that you see buyers make.
I guess the two mistakes that come to mind for me is don't transfer money around. It makes things so much more complicated. figure out which account you're going to use your down payment from, have the funds in there, and then don't move anything. Because every time you make a big deposit or a big transfer, then we have to follow the paper basically, and it just makes the process slower. So that's one thing. The second thing is don't make any huge life decisions while you're in the process of getting a mortgage. Don't leave your job. Don't buy a car. Actually, I made that mistake, which when we were refinancing, and my processor was like, "Did you get a car loan?" And I was like, "Oh my God," because those things just affect your debt to income. So then we have to go back and sort of fiddle with things. So it's better to like wait and get your car after you close. Wait to transfer money if you need to transfer money for something other than the purchase until after you close. And then I guess just the last thing, I'm dealing with sort of a difficult client right now, not referred by Victoria or Rashidah. And one of the reasons he's difficult is because he just doesn't listen to me. And I think when you decide who your team is, you need to follow their advice and listen to them. Just like how, I don't tell my doctor how to do his job. Don't tell me how to do my job. Let me do what I can for you because I really do have your best interest at heart. And it makes the process easier if you follow what me and my team tell you to do rather than try to fight it, because inevitably you're going to have to do what we're telling you to do anyway. So those would be my like 3 pieces of advice.
I concur with that because I think it's really challenging when you work with people that don't trust you. And like this is a relationship based transaction for the parts that we all play in it. And you want to feel like you trust and can listen to the advice that we're giving you. And if you can't, that's fine. You need to find that person that you can work with. And it's fine that it's not me or it's not these guys on the call, but it's super important that you have that person on your team because you can make mistakes that can hurt you if you don't have the person that you can listen to their guidance. Because we're basically trying to guide you to make this process less stressful. It's a huge emotional roller coaster is the one thing I really prep people for is that, you're going to be in love one day and then you're going to be heartbroken the next day. And it's, you need to prepare yourself for that emotional weather. And if you don't have the right people there to support you, you need your like real estate therapist and your lawyer and your mortgage person to like help you avoid missteps and not make this process harder than it is. Because it is really a hard process. Rashidah, do you have some first-time buyers?
I would say be upfront with your attorney. Always also timeframes, be realistic, have that conversation with your attorney. Many times first-time buyers book a close, they're ready to move out. I had a client that first-time buyer, they did their movers, schedule everything, and then they're like, "Hey, Rashidah," and I'm like, "You're not clear to close. I can't schedule you tomorrow." And just, have conversations with your attorney. Have conversations, especially when it comes to like your time wise, whether you're in a lease situation, whether you have to be out by a certain date. And then I always say, I'd rather you ask me a question. If I don't have the answer, then I'll get it for you. Hopefully don't wait till the last minute and then it's too late for me to try to intervene. And be realistic about what you can afford as well and closing costs.
Yeah. And Rashidah's made some really amazing Excel closing cost calculators for new construction, for co-ops, for condos that we can share. They're linked in the resources that I share after the class. So I think just really having straightforward and honest conversations with the people that you're choosing to work with is really great advice. Somebody asked, can you find 20% below market prices for co-ops or condos in Brooklyn? My opinion is no. I think that existed only during this whole year in the luxury Manhattan market. If you had a $20 million property that you're trying to sell, you were taking a 20% discount to move it because there just wasn't those kind of buyers in this market. It's been highly competitive for anybody in the $400,000 to $700,000 price point. There's a ton of buyers that can afford that right now. They can get the down payment together and they can get the monthlies together. So if you're in that price point, you have a lot of competition because there's a lot of buyers that can also afford that price point. You can get maybe 20% down if you were paying all cash and you're buying something that other people didn't want. And what other people don't want right now is things that need work. but they're not so bad that a developer would buy them to do a flip. So things that like need a new kitchen and bath that you see value in, but that I would say most buyers right now want turnkey properties. They just don't have the mental capacity to be like, okay, we're gonna buy this place, do this heavy lift, and then we're gonna have to go in and redo the kitchen and bath. Because a lot of people are motivated to move right now because of quality of life, and doing a construction project doesn't seem appealing. It seems appealing to me. I want to do that. But for a lot of people right now, they just don't have the mental bandwidth to then take on that next step. I'm going to take like 1 or 2 more questions, and we're going to wrap because it's after 6 o'clock. And I know this has gone on longer, but I think the questions have been, and conversation have just been so good. If my plan to move from renting to owning, can I expect some same monthly payments roughly? I don't know what you're paying now in rent. It depends on a lot of things, where you plan on moving, what the maintenance and taxes are, and are you moving within the same neighborhood? It might be challenging, but if you were taking a step down, if you were moving from Brooklyn Heights to Sunset Park, probably could stay the same. But if you're already in an A neighborhood where the rents have been really high and you haven't renegotiated because of COVID, I think that there's a lot of variables, but generally would say that if you are moving into a slightly less desirable neighborhood, that you might be able to do that. To owning, that's the same question. Is there any other questions? You guys can put them in. How often do deals like that happen? We've kind of talked about the discount. We will be sending the ebook. Yep. You guys, if that's it on the questions, I know that there's still 14 of us. It was a big group of people that came today. I want to thank you all for your time. I really appreciated the interesting questions and conversation we had. I always love talking to Rashidah and Lisa. So if that's it, we'll be following up with an email tomorrow with a bunch of the resources, but please just reach out to us directly if you need anything. I'm happy to help in any way I can, even if you're not going to work with me. I love giving free advice to people, honestly. Okay, bye ladies.
Thank you,
Bye
everyone.
Thank you so
guys
Bye.
so
much.
much.
Great night. Talk to you soon. Thank you.